ready to get back into our Father's Word here at the chapel. We're going to pick it up today in the fantastic book of Judges, chapter 7, verse 8. And if you missed our last lecture, let me kind of recap for you. It's very important for you to understand today's lecture if you missed our last lecture. But the Lord, for 7 years, God raised up Midian, along with their allies, the Amalekites and the children of the east, to oppress Israel. Why? Because they did the evil with the article, meaning they fell back into idolatry after Deborah straightened them out and ruled, and they had peace for 40 years. But after 7 years of literally starving to death, you see, the Midianites didn't just steal their food. They had moved their tents, their camels, I think their families, across the Jordan and were living on the west side of Jordan. And I think their intent was to take their land away from Israel, including their houses and their wells and their vineyards and their olive yards. But after 7 years of almost starving to death, the people of Israel finally cried out to the Lord and asked for him to deliver them. And of course, along with that came repentance and to stop the idolatry. And Gideon was raised up by our father. Gideon, a little more than a lad at the time, and he was, remember, down in the wine press, trying to get enough grain together, which normally would be done on the threshing floor, to make a loaf of bread. And the Lord appeared to him and said, "Thou man of valor, through you I'm going to raise the children of Israel out of the hand of oppression of the Midianites." So after God giving proof after proof, you remember the fleece that Gideon put out before the Lord with the wool, and I want it to be wet from the dew of the evening, first on the wool, and the whole threshing floor around it to be dry. And the Lord did that. And the next night he said, "Just one more thing, Lord. Can we do that with the fleece again? But this time make it to where the fleece is dry, the wool is dry, but the threshing floor around it is wet with dew." And the Lord did it. So Gideon called the army together. He ended up with 32,000 of Israel to go up against 135,000 of the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the children of the east. That was way too many for the Lord. The Lord said, "I don't want Israel to boast and say, we delivered ourselves from the hand of the Midianites. I want them to realize that the Lord delivered them. The strength and power of Yahweh delivered them from the oppression of the Midianites." So first it was cut down. They said, "Okay, is anybody afraid to go up and fight against the Midianites?" 22,000 of the 32,000 said, "Yes, I'm afraid. I want to go home." They went home, and that's probably a good thing, because if you get one coward among 100 men, it starts rubbing off on the other 100. So there was 10,000 left to fight against 135,000. That was still too many as far as our father was concerned. He whittled that down to 300, and that's where we left off in our last lecture. I'll remind you, 300 in biblical numerics is symbolic of the strength of the Holy Spirit. And again, God is going to prove to the people of Israel that it is His hand, His power, His might that delivered them from the Midianites, not their own power. There's no way they could claim that they did it themselves with 300 going up against 135,000. So with that recap and update, let's pick it up today. We ask that word of wisdom in Yeshua Jesus' precious name. Father, we ask you to open eyes, open ears this day. We pick it up with our fifth judge, Gideon, in Judges chapter 7, verse 8. "So the people took victuals in their hand." This is the 300 who are remaining. Remember, too, that it wasn't Gideon who chose these 300. It was the Lord who chose them, and by setting the conditions that they would be chosen. And that was, if they came up to the water and they kneeled down and cupped up a cup of water in their hand and then stood back up and then lapped the water like a dog from their cupped hand, they stayed. If they kneeled down, symbolic of kneeling down and worshiping the Antichrist, then they were to go. So God chose the 300. And their trumpets. So give us, you 9,700 that are leaving, leave us some food and your trumpets. We're going to need those. And he sent all the rest of Israel, 9,700 of them, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley, the army of the Midianites, all 135,000 waiting. Verse 9. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, to Gideon, Arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. You and the 300 that I've left, I'm going to show Israel the power of God by delivering 135,000 into your hand. Now, the flesh is weak, and even though God had given proof after proof to Gideon that he indeed meant what he said, God's still going to give this lad, I think he's slowly seeing Gideon's confidence build, but he's still a little concerned maybe about Gideon's confidence. And he's going to give him one more sign that he indeed intends, the Father intends to deliver the Midianites into the hand of Israel. Verse 10, But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Purah, thy servant, down to the host. And God's setting up here to where Gideon can hear what's going on in the armies of the Midianites. And it's going to give Gideon confidence that he is going to have the victory. And Purah, by the way, the prime of that in the Hebrew, means the branch. And who is our branch, the branch? Of course, that's Jesus Christ. Don't go anywhere without the branch. And Purah was a servant, and of course, Jesus Christ served all of us on the cross. He's going to hear the fear that's spreading in the camp or the army of the Midianites, and he'll be able to take courage from that. Verse 11. And thou shalt hear what they say, the Midianites, and afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down unto the host, the armies of the enemy. Then went he down with Purah, his servant, unto the outside, or the furthest most edge of the camp, you could think of this, of the armed men that were in the host. Only 2. Well, let's make that 3 if we count the branch. Jesus Christ was with him also. Don't go anywhere without Jesus Christ. Verse 12. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers. Same thing as locusts. And we're going to see this locust army destroyed by the power of God. And in our last lecture I mentioned there's a locust army in the future. You can read about it in Revelation chapter 9, Joel chapter 1 and 2. You know who's going to destroy that locust army? It's our Heavenly Father is going to do it again. They were like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitude. There was a bunch of them, 300,000 against 135,000. Again, no way that any one of these 300 or anyone else in Israel could say, look what we did ourselves. They're going to have to give the Lord credit for defeating the armies of the Midianites. And they will. Verse 13. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow. These are Midianites, the enemy, talking to each other. That told a dream unto his fellow and said, Behold, I dreamed a dream. No doubt the Lord had placed or caused him to dream this dream. And lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, into the armies of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. The tent fell in ruin. This tent is with the definite article, and it indicates that this tent belonged to a principal, or in a military sense you could think of it, the general, the leader of the army. So we've got barley bread, which is poor man's bread. You remember when Gideon first started out in his humility, he said, my family is but a poor family in Manasseh, and I'm the least of my family, the youngest in my family. Are you sure you want me to deliver Israel, Lord? So here we have this cake of barley, again, poor man's bread, indicating Gideon's family status among Manasseh. But also, anytime you hear bread, I hope you think of the bread of life. Again, don't go anywhere without Jesus Christ. He gives us the victory over Satan. Verse 14. And his fellow, this again is the Midianite that heard his dream, is about to interpret it, answered and said, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. Divine intervention even being recognized by the enemy. God in this verse is Ha Elohim in the Hebrew with the article. It means God the Creator, not Yahweh the covenant God. Verse 15. And it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof that he worshipped. A good thing to do. Always go to the Father in prayer when something goes good your way, and thank Him. Very important, don't forget to thank Father, and you do that through worshiping Him. And returned into the host of Israel, all 300 of them, and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. And there you see that confidence, that spark of courage that was needed to lead these 300 against 135,000. Gideon has no doubt in his heart at this time, in his mind, that the sword of the Lord is going to deliver the Midianites into his hand. Verse 16. And he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. Let's see, we have 300. We're going to divide them into 3 companies. That's 100 men in each of the companies. And he put a trumpet in every man's hand. Normally there would be 1 trumpet for each company, but here we see they kept, you remember, the trumpets from the 9,700 that they sent home, and now each of the 300 have a trumpet with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. Now, a pitcher, probably not a very good English word for us to understand what these were. I would think of it more as a bucket or a pail, for example, and P-A-I-L. I'll spell it so it's not confused with the tint of a color pail. And then the lamps, of course, were small torches, you could think of them. So what they're doing is each man has a bucket or a pail, and then they have already lit their torches, but they lowered them down into the pail where it would not be seen until they want them to be seen. What we're going to see is they're going to exercise the element of surprise here upon the Midianites. Verse 17. And he, Gideon, said unto them, Look on me, and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. You watch me, and whatever I do, you do as well. Verse 18, of course, this is not Gideon's plan. This is the Lord's plan, and Gideon knows it, but he's the leader. Verse 18, when I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye with the trumpets also, on every side of all the camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And now some critics or scholars point out that Gideon's starting to get a little bit of an ego here. What did Gideon say? The sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they think that he's claiming some big equality with the Lord by putting himself in that phrase, but he's not. And I want you to refer you back to verse 14. What was it that the one Midianite said to the other in verse 14? This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon. So he's playing on what the fear, and no doubt this dream that the one Midianite had by this point in time, that this is coming to pass, is spread like wildfire through the camp. So Gideon is playing on what the one Midianite said to the other. He's not claiming equality with the Lord. Verse 19. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him, and he was leading one of the 3 companies, in other words, came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch, just a little bit after midnight. And they had but newly set the watch, many of them probably on their way to their tent after having saying, thank goodness my watch is over, now I can finally get some sleep. And they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. Now, a couple things on that. When they blew the trumpets, if normally there's one trumpet for every company of men, that's one thing. But then here there's only 300 men, but each one of them has a trumpet, and it's dark, and they can't see anything except these torches that are being held in the one hand of the 300 Israelites. But when they hear 300 trumpets blaring, they think there's 300 companies of Israelites there, and then they see all of a sudden a circle of 300 torches around them. That's all they can see. They don't have any idea how many of Israel are standing behind those holding the torches and blowing the trumpets in the front. They got a total element of surprise here, the noise of the trumpets this late at night, and then all these lights appearing. It throws them into complete disarray, frightening the Midianites. A good plan, and our Father's in control. Verse 20. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets, and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands. It seemed that they just, boom, just appeared out of nowhere, a total surprise. And the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And this, again, going back to what the Midianites said to the other, which no doubt had been communicated throughout the camp, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. Verse 21. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host, and cried and fled. They went into total chaos. And God in control. The bread, the barley bread that the one Midianite dreamed rolled down into the camp, the army of the Midianites, and ruined the general's tent. If you wipe out the general, the troops are not far behind. So, and what happens next? And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow. What this is talking about is that the Midianites, the Amalekites, and the children of the east, the allies of the Midianites, all started fighting each other. They started killing each other. And this is not the first time that this was written of, or the only time. That it may be the first time, but it's not the only time that the Lord used this tactic. In 2 Chronicles chapter 20, Jehoshaphat, a king of Judah, was fighting against the Ammonites, the Moabites, and the Edomites. And God sent a fear among the enemy's army. Then first the Ammonites and the Moabites started killing and fighting against the Edomites. When the Edomites were all dead, the Ammonites and Moabites turned on each other and totally wiped each other out. So God in control. And again, Israel can't take credit for this victory. They know who delivered Midian into their hand. And then finishing verse 22, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Bethshittah in Zererath, and to the border of Abel-Meholah unto Tabath. Now, all of these locations are basically unknown, with the exception of Abel-Meholah, which is listed in the book of Kings as the home of Elisha, the prophet. And what is happening here, though, is you've got the remaining part of, which is not much, we'll see here in a minute. They've lost 120,000 of their 135,000. So you got 10,000 left is all, and they're trying to get back to the Jordan, to one of the fords, which is a crossing place, so that they can get back across on the east side of Jordan, thinking that surely Gideon and his 300 wouldn't pursue after them if they could get to the Jordan and cross it. 23. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali and out of Asher and out of Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. Now, I think this is probably partly the 9,700 who weren't cowards, because they were given the chance to go home early on when the war against the Midianites was coming up. But they chose to stay. But you remember the Lord said, that's too many. I want it down to 300. So here the call goes out. The victory is near over the Midianites. So part of these 9,700 are coming back to help. 24. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together, and took the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan. Now, Beth-barah in the Hebrew language means house of the ford, and a ford again being a point where the Jordan would be easily crossed. And what they're saying here is get down and cut off the Midianites who are fleeing for their lives before they get to Jordan. Don't let them cross the Jordan. 25. And they took 2 princes of the Midianites, these being the Ephraimites who joined in the fray, Oreb and Zeb. And they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeb they slew at the winepress of Zeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of Jordan. They took care of business. Once they got started, they took care of business. Isaiah, the prophet, wrote of this victory and spoke of rock Oreb in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 26, and referring to it as a great victory by Israel over the Midianites. And the subject there in Isaiah chapter 10, verse 26, is the defeat of Antichrist through the type of Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. But know that the Lord, just as he gave Gideon the victory over the Midianites here, the Lord is going to give us the victory over the Antichrist as well. So Midian has been put down. You would think that everyone in Israel would be happy, but they're not. Let's find out who's not happy and why. Chapter 8, verse 1. And the men of Ephraim, these are the ones who caught up with and killed the two princes back in verse 25, Oreb and Zeb. And the men of Ephraim said unto him, unto Gideon, Why hast thou served us thus? If you have a reference Bible, you have a note that in the Hebrew, that is, what thing is this that thou hast done to us? Thou callest us not when thou wentest to fight with the Midianites. And they did chide or contend with him, Gideon, sharply or strongly. They were angry because Gideon was going to war against the Midianites, and he didn't call them. And of course, it wasn't Gideon who decided how many troops that needed to fight against the Midianites. Do you think God would have supported Gideon calling Ephraim and saying, we need more men, you better send some troops down here? Of course not. He already had too many. 32,000 was too many. And they said, who wants to go home, who's afraid? 22,000 went home because they were cowards. That left 10,000. That was still too many, and God cut it down to 300. So how will Gideon handle this situation? Verse 2, And he said unto them, What have I done now in comparison of you? Your deeds are much greater than mine. All we did was put the Midianites on the run. It was you and your men who killed the two princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? And Abiezer being one of the families of the Manassites, which was Gideon's tribe. And you have to understand the horticulture terms used here. Gleaning, if you have, let's say, a vineyard, and you go through and you pick the grapes when they're due to be picked. The harvest is ready. Then you go back a second time, and there's always that cluster that was hidden under some leaves or was in a hard place to reach, so it was left. And that's called gleaning. What's left over after the first harvest is the gleaning. And what Gideon is saying here, isn't the leftovers better of Ephraim than the priority crop, the vintage of the Manassites? He's laying it on. You boys did a great job. You killed Oreb and Zeb. Verse 3. He continues, God hath delivered unto your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison to you? I did so little compared to what you guys did. Then their anger, or their spirit in the Hebrew, their ruach, was abated toward him when he had said that. And he used psychology on them here. I doubt that they even realized it, but he smoothed things over real well. You know, we can learn from this too, though, in our daily lives, from how Gideon handled this situation. If somebody deserves a pat on the back, if you are put in a position of authority in your workplace, let's say, for example, and you have employees, you know, don't take this wrong, you don't make stuff up or tell fibs, but if somebody deserves a pat on the back, give them a pat on the back. You'll find that the next time that you need them to kick in a little extra or to stand with you in a matter, they're going to be there for you because you were there for them. And we have a saying here in Arkansas, you can attract more flies with honey than you can with vinegar. And again, when somebody deserves a pat on the back, when they deserve to be praised, don't be stingy with the pats on the back and the praise. It pays great dividends to handle situations like this. Verse 4, Gideon is not through with the Midianites. And Gideon came to Jordan and passed over. Whoa, he's not had enough. Much to the dismay of the Midianites, they thought if they crossed over Jordan that Gideon would stop. He's not stopping. He and the 300 men that were with him faint, yet pursuing them. And they were faint because they were hungry, they were tired from battle. No doubt they were thirsty. But they're wanting to refresh themselves so that they can continue the pursuit of the Midianites and the Amalekites and children of the east that were left with them. Verse 5, And he said unto the men of Succoth, this is there are many towns named Succoth. Succoth, most of you that know any Hebrew know that means booths, and it's what the name of the Feast of Tabernacles is in the Hebrew language. This particular Succoth, though, was in the allotment of land given to Gad, which was one of the tribes that stayed on the east side of Jordan. But Gideon is saying, these are Israelites, remember. Give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, my 300 warriors, for they be faint. And I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian, the kings of the enemy, in other words. And, my men are tired. They need rest, but we're not going to stop. We're going to keep on until we catch up with these. Verse 6, And the princes of Succoth said, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand? Have you already conquered the kings of the Midianites, that we should give bread unto thine army? Let's do one more verse and then we'll stop for today. And Gideon said, Therefore, when the Lord hath delivered Zebah and Zalmunna unto mine hand, not if, when the Lord delivers it, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. We'll be back. In other words, the men of Succoth, the elders of Succoth, in their great wisdom, decided they could not give bread and water to these 300 warriors that were with Gideon, even though they were Israelites, their own people, for fear that Zalmunna and the other king of the Midianites would come back and kill them for helping Gideon and his 300. And Gideon, being the man that he was, he said, this is not, I can't deal with this right now, but when the Lord delivers the Midianites into my hand, I'm going to come back and deal with you, and it's going to cost you some of your hide. And he means what he says, and don't miss the next lecture. We'll see how all this turns out. We've got a short message. We'll ask you to listen a moment, won't you please?